your time, and thank you for just being part of the ORT family over the years. So really appreciate you sharing some of your expertise with us this morning. To everybody else, I think most of you are already part of the ORT network, but for the few of you that are not, ORT runs a mentorship program within the Jewish community for Jewish entrepreneurs. We also offer training and networking. If any of you would like to participate, please be in touch with Lisa or myself. And if you'd like to be put on the database for our weekly webinars, then also you could either put your email address into the chat box or just be in touch with us. So Stephen's going to start talking shortly. If anybody has got questions while he's talking, please put them into the chat box and we will go through them at the end. But yeah, just thank you to everyone for your morning, and over to you, Stephen.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be here. Thanks, ORT, for the opportunity, and to all of you for making the time available to talk about where we've come from over this last 6 months, and some thoughts in terms of where we might be going with respect to the COVID disruption, as we call it, and the impact on society and business in general. So I've prepared just a few slides, which I'll put up on the screen now, and I'll use this as the basis for what we chat about. A very simple, literally 5 slides. I'm happy to take questions from people as they might pop up during the session, and I might ask that we park them, but I think it's a good practice for you to ask a question if it comes to you, and it might spark thoughts for myself as well, which might be useful. So just as background, so I'm the managing director of a company called the Change Consulting Group. We help mainly the private sector and corporate South Africa implement large-scale change. It's usually of technology programs related to leadership, operating models. We do a lot of work around culture and organizational design. In fact, one of my colleagues, Tracy Gould, is in the group today. And so as a result of that, we get a fairly good sense of what's happening in the corporate sector and in business generally, particularly in retail, FMCG, telecommunications, and financial services, which is banking and insurance. The only sector that I personally haven't worked in is mining. And I'm fascinated with business and helping entrepreneurs get ahead, especially small and medium-sized business. So this presentation has been designed using a lot of data points from different sectors of our economy, both corporate and SME, and the same, and with input from colleagues and clients in Europe, the States, Australia, and in Asia, and I'll speak to that more in a moment. I'm going to speak about general trends that we're seeing, and then speak to how these apply specifically to small business as we go through this. I also want to say at the outset that as CCG, we feel that it's an ethical duty of a consultant to take a position on things, and that often that's valuable for clients because they can ask us a question and they know they're going to get an honest answer. But it can be challenging too, because sometimes the person hearing the response isn't happy with what we have to say. So I might touch on things that might sound controversial during our discussion today, and please feel free to challenge things, to respond to things in a way that you feel is appropriate. I will speak to those items as they come up. All right, so the Survive and Thrive Guide is available on the front page of the CCG website, and it's a document, a 10-page document that has built some level of following over the last 6 months. It emerged from a set of Zoom sessions that we ran from April 27 to about the end of June, with a group of 45 business owners, change consultants, entrepreneurs, and corporate leaders in 4 countries on 4 continents. So we had this, it's called the Global Change Academy, which we launched. So we've been having a lot of fun launching these digital products, because supposedly we're in the age of digital, and I want to talk about that. So the Global Change Academy helped us speak to a very wide audience, experiencing COVID in different ways, over a period of 2 months. And we wrote the Survive and Thrive Guide at the end of June. It was published sort of early July as a grouping of a set of ideas. Where we've moved to now is starting to talk about the great, the golden, the ugly of the COVID disruption, as we call it. And that's really what I want to, these 2 sets of ideas, where we were 6 months ago, which I believe is very different from where we are today, is what I'd like to share with you, where we've come from and where we think that we might be going to. So what is the context? So we have the view that the COVID disruption, as we call it, is the most profound change event of our lifetimes. So I think it's really, really important psychologically and cognitively, mentally, for us to take in the fact that we're living through an event that does not happen often in the world. In fact, the Spanish flu pandemic, which is probably the last time we had a global pandemic in the world, because SARS and MERS, etc., was not global, even though there were coronavirus outbreaks. The Spanish flu was 100 years ago. It killed 50 million people. And so there are 2 important things here. Number one, we are living history. We're actually living through history. And of course, it's a tragic history in a sense, but I think it's also really important to kind of let that sink in, because it might inform how we respond to this. The second is that the world went on. The world went on after the Spanish flu, after millions of lives were lost, and we will get on too. And that's kind of the message of hope that I'd like to leave. I'd like to start with that, and that's the very last point I'd like to make with this presentation, is that we will get through this. The thing I'm more concerned about is not the virus. The thing that I'm concerned about, and I've personally written about, and CCG's written about for months already, is the socio-economic impact of the virus. And not so much the virus per se, but the suppression strategy recommended by the WHO, the lockdown strategy, and implemented differently across the world. That is the thing that has really will have a much more severe impact on our society. And so this presentation is about how do we as small business owners protect our businesses, get a real sense of where we've come from, where we're going to, and how do we prepare ourselves for the next 6 months. It is my view that the next 6 months will determine the next 10 years of our lives. And that relates to whether there's a second wave, how bad the economy really is in South Africa and globally, and how governments and ourselves respond. All right, so we'll get there. The guide speaks to 3 things. Survive, which is made up of 2, how do we survive COVID-19, the COVID disruption, which is about saving lives and saving cash flow. And then how do we thrive, which is ultimately what I think we should really be focused on in the longer term. Once we get through, we need to figure out how to survive first, and then we figure out how to thrive. How do we pivot? How do we reinvent? And how do we grow? And that point 5, the change paradox, is very, very important. What's very important to realize, and it came through very strongly in our research and our engagement with dozens of businesses over the last 6 months, is that COVID has impacted businesses differently. Some organizations are thriving. Zoom, that we're using now, the share price has shown returns of 100% over the last since March, over the past year. So certain industries are doing incredibly well, and we can learn from them. So and I'll give you concrete examples as we go through. So some of you might be graphic designers. We were speaking to a graphic designer the other day. He has pivoted his business to now only sell his services to overseas companies, and he earns in dollars. He earns in dollars, he converts to rands, and thank you very much, with the exchange rate in his favor, he's living a very nice life. And in addition to that, his competitors are all charging in dollars. He can undercut their pricing. So that's a concrete example of how some are doing well. Online gaming is doing well. Gambling is doing well. Online entertainment, streaming of music and movies are doing well. And then, of course, hospitality is doing exceptionally, has been exceptionally hard hit by COVID. The other thing to take into account is that the same sector might be impacted differently. So in the past couple of weeks, I had the opportunity to speak to one of the directors of one of South Africa's biggest retailers. They focus on fashion, and they focus on fairly high-end product, including a lot of imported product, and they're having a hard time at the moment. Versus another retailer who's more differentiated, vertically differentiated, including technology product. And the CEO of that company told me that in the last 3 months, they're up to 50% on last year in certain SKUs and in certain verticals of their business, in certain product categories in their business. So the virus has resulted in commercial winners and losers. And what's really important is to get a sense of how this impacts your business, and how you might need to respond in the coming months, and how I'm sure you have responded already. Okay, so let's go back to survive. In terms of save lives, this is really about how we put protocols in place to protect ourselves and our employees and our fellow managers, directors, etc. I'm not going to say too much on this because I think we all know what the protocols are. So personally, my view is we must hold to these protocols, particularly at this point as we go to level 2. So, you know, on all of our literature, we include now, wear a mask, you might save a life. We believe that's very, very important. We need to manage the virus, and this is the mitigation strategy. If we want to protect business, we want to protect our businesses, if we want to protect our parents, our children, ourselves, it's very important to follow those protocols, and those protocols are good. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. If anyone has questions on Save Lives, please ask those, and I'm happy to respond as best I can. In terms of cash flow, we will speak to that in more detail on coming slides, but there's no doubt that it's incredibly important at this time to first get a sense of what you have in the bank, what's on your balance sheet, and to work quite aggressively to both pull in money owing to you, to enter into contracts that make sense for your business. So taking deposits, protecting your risk, protecting the downside, and managing money, including the amount of debt that we take on. And we'll talk about debt in a later slide. Okay, Stuart, you asked me my prediction for the next 6 months. It's a great question. I'm going to come to that right at the end, under the ugly part, unfortunately. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. The box is open in front of my screen, and I can see them as they come in, and I will respond to you. All right. The other piece, so cash flow we'll talk about in more detail because that's critical. Let's talk about Thrive. So CCG is of the view that this is an ideal time for you to even if you just play, like experiment with pivoting your business into new areas, into new price points, into new what we call verticals, new product offerings. So if you currently like that designer, for example, if you currently work only for the retail sector, and you might have lost some of your work, maybe you can try and pivot into medical, as an example. How do you reinvent your brand? How do you freshen your brand? It might take some money to redo aspects of your brand, and then grow. If you've got a business that's doing okay at this time, this is a fantastic time to win market share, because many businesses will not make it through the COVID disruption. And if we can be really creative and we can respond to this crisis in a good way, people really need support. That's something that we found, is that we're willing to put ourselves out there. People really need someone to talk to, even if it's to bounce ideas around. People really need good input and ideas that they can work with. All right, I'm fairly short on technology, and I say that in terms of the fact that there's a lot of talk about the fourth industrial revolution and how our society is going to fundamentally change going forward. I'm not of that view, and in fact, our advice to clients has always been rather buy second generation tested tech as opposed to being on the bleeding edge of tech. The main reason for that is that it's extremely expensive, and you're going to pay for others to learn. Rather come in on the second wave of technology that's introduced, unless you're really in the space, in the field, and you understand what you're dealing with. Technology should always be an enabler. It's not the strategy. So digital, for example, people often talk these days about what is your digital strategy. We're interested in the digital strategy, but how does that link to your commercial strategy? How does that link to your operating model? How does that link to your commercial imperatives and the outputs that you're seeking to achieve as a business? We can talk a lot more about technology going in the next couple of slides. I think it's really important to state what a profound psychological impact lockdown has had on people. And we will only realize the full extent of that in 6 months or so, when we, please God, are out of this current phase. I mean, you can feel that we're slowly easing up from level 3 now to level 2. But if people are experiencing a fuzziness, feeling depressed, feeling anxious, feeling a level of fear, etc., that's all the result of an extreme event. And that's why I started off by saying we must take cognizance of the fact that we are in a massive change moment, and we can't underestimate that. And then the final piece on this slide, and then we're going to go into more detail on each of these points, is that one of the pieces of gold that it's the language we started using. One of the things that we really, I think, come to value through COVID is the value of our relationships. We've really we've been forced by this tremendous sense of loss, of losing connectedness, having to connect through the screen. We've really come to understand that we are social beings first as human beings, that we need one another, whether we need our family, we need our friends, we need our business relationships, we need to be in the office together. And I'm hoping that that lesson will stay with us going forward. All right, so what's been great? Let's start off with the good news. It's very possible that business will boom post-COVID. And what we would like to really strongly suggest to every business is that we take time, look really carefully at what we're doing currently. And I'm happy to take questions on your specific businesses, because I'm not aware, obviously I don't know most of you, I'm not aware what you're specifically involved in, but this is an ideal time to grow your business, reinvent your business, find ways to try and get a sense of how society might be the same and might be different going forward, and think about how you might respond. And I'm going to speak to some ideas down below. So debt, let's start off talking about sort of pure economic issues. Debt is cheap with interest rates near zero and will remain so for a long time. So our prediction is that debt will be cheap to secure for the next 4 or 5 years, as long as you have a balance sheet to support that and a cash flow to support that. So debt is a double-edged sword. It helps businesses grow, but it's very important in our view to be able to manage the cash flow required to service that debt, and to understand the risk that in the medium to longer term it might result in. Distributed work and the acceptance of what we used to call flexi time or flexi work or remote working, we now call this distributed work, a work from anywhere strategy. This is an area that we've been doing a lot of work in over the last 6 months. This means that it's now much more acceptable to have smaller offices. You can save on your overheads. People can work from home to a point. So we've seen situations where organizations have overcooked this for purely commercial reasons, or because they thought that everyone loved distributed work and this was the way of the future. We don't believe that we're going to see a fundamental change, but there are ways here to save on what we've traditionally been forced to believe is the norm around big offices. This is very much the case in South Africa. It will become cooler to have smaller offices, remote offices, work from home offices, using offices like WeWork, etc., where you just rent space in a collaborative office setting. Those things will become much more acceptable, and there are ways that you can save money for your business. I think this is an ideal time as well to really negotiate on fees, on anything that you are asked to pay for in your business, whether it's stationery, whether it's salaries, furniture, a product, whatever it is. Try and negotiate even 10 or 15% of the required price or fee. And in most cases, people will accommodate, and that money adds up. It's really important to start looking at diversification of product, maybe into lower price points. And then a trend that we're definitely seeing, and this is something we want to call out, is that buying patterns seem to be changing. And they're changing in two interesting ways. They're changing into big box and online mass consumables. So we're going to see an explosion of health-related products, everything from gloves to masks. We've seen this already, but in many ways it still has to be formalized. Gloves, masks, vitamins, supportive medications, cleaning products, soap, etc. So you're going to see a big push. We're already seeing a big push, but in other jurisdictions, particularly the States, this is very much the case. We're going to see big box, we've even called it huge box, massive box shopping and online shopping for mass consumables on the one side, which is less interesting for us because that's a trend that's been coming for years. But what we're predicting is a possible return to high street, to more specialized, premium, high-end products, because coming out of lockdown, people are beginning to question, what is life all about? What do I really want to spend my money on? What do I need to spend my money on? People speaking to us about wanting to lead a more soulful life. Leaders, even at the most high level, we've literally seen people that we've looked up to as leaders of business in South Africa break down in tears in front of us, or shown very high levels of anxiety and stress, which has been a very interesting process because it's shown the level of vulnerability that people have been forced into, and the level of soul searching that the pandemic has induced for many people. So my view is that that's a good thing. It's a useful thing. It's also interesting to think about how that's going to impact on spending patterns. Lifestyle products like cannabis, and the new trend now coming out of the States and Canada is mushrooms, microdosing these are for health reasons. This is not for getting high. This is for health reasons. Again, people wanting to protect their bodies, take care of themselves. In fact, the cannabis might also be about getting high because you can do that legally now. But we've been speaking to people who are listing cannabis companies and mushroom companies. The latest thing I heard about just this last week, mainly through Canada. It's a very interesting space. So if anyone on this forum is interested in cannabis, mushrooms, any of these, I'm not sure what to call them even because I don't know much about it, but the psychotropic, I think they're called, drugs, then this is definitely something to look into. Similarly, we're going to see a massive uptick, and this is based on data coming out of our retail clients. People are buying casual wear. They're not buying formal wear at the moment because most of us are at home. We don't have a need for formal wear. Many people are feeling depressed and don't have a desire to go shopping. I'm interested in your feedback on that, but that's certainly the trend that we're finding. So there might well be a sense that there's a return, as I say, to the high street. People don't want to go into big malls. That's definitely a data point that's been confirmed over and over again. A big development like the waterfront is probably in Cape Town is quite possibly in trouble. It will need to reinvent itself in many ways. How do we protect people, large groups of people interacting within those spaces? And if we have to, from a social distancing point of view, manage the number of people moving through those spaces, how do those businesses remain commercially viable? And then the final point I just want to leave you with is that after the Spanish flu of up to about 1918, we saw the Roaring Twenties. There was, before the Great Depression, and I think this is also very important to hold in mind, before the Great Depression, there was 10 years of massive growth in the States. And we might well see that again. So our advice then is plan for the best and protect against the worst, right? So I think that there's good reason to believe that there are potentially good times ahead for most businesses, but the extent to which we manage debt and margin is going to be critical. And we can talk about that in more detail if you'd like to. All right, so also what's part of the great is how we live our lives. So a renewed focus on relationships. And on a personal level, in relation to children, and on a professional level in relation to work, we are really encouraging a pivoting away from screens. How do we reach out to one another and build relationships without screens? Because Zoom, and I'm not going to get into this in too much detail, but Zoom is not ideal for maintaining relationship and doing certainly strategic, creative, and innovative work. There's going to be a powerful move, we believe, a social move towards authentic living. What am I really here for? Am I doing the job that I really want to do? I made it through the pandemic. What I really want to do with my life now. There's going to be challenges on an ongoing basis to rethink social systems, particularly the health sector in South Africa. And we do believe that there's a big opportunity there, and governance systems. I've written on the ANC over the past months. That's a separate conversation. I do think we're going to see a shake-up in South African politics, and I think that's a good thing. Yeah, I'm not going to say too much more about this. I'm very happy to make these slides available and take some of these conversations offline. Are there any questions on this particular slide before I move on? Okay, so let's go to the gold. What have we learned over this period? From a leadership point of view, we found that most leaders were caught off guard by a crisis of this nature. We've definitely found that the leadership capability around large-scale crisis management change has been difficult to achieve for many organizations. Many organizations have pushed through and done well enough from an operational point of view. And these are mainly big corporates, but we've seen it in the private sector as well, in the SME sector. What we have found is that organizations that provide ongoing communication, direction, and good information have done better. And that's really what employees have needed and will continue to need. The other thing that I would really stress is that we don't become complacent with level 2. So if anyone on this call is running or involved with a larger business, we must really work harder to protect our employees and our customers. We've written quite a lot about what we call safety capital. We believe this is going to become more and more important, which means that people will shop at places where they feel safe. And that's been very clear in the Cape, where certain retail brands, in fact, I'll name them because they should do better. ShopRite accounted for 80% or more of all infections and shop closures during the 6-month period. And an organization like Woolworths and Pick n Pay to also quite a large extent did much better. So it is important to build into your brand a sense of how you create safety for both your employees and your customers. It will reward you if you do that. And then the final point which I want to make on this slide is around fear. We've seen, as I said earlier, leaders in spaces of incredible anxiety, and that leads to bad thinking. It leads to what we call cognitive dissonance. It leads to bad choice making. So it's really important, and here again, this is where relationship is so important, and your partners in your business, if you have partners or your friends, your family, etc., to speak to people about what's happening for you, about the impact of lockdown and the impact of the pandemic. We're going through a big thing here, and that needs to be recognized first at a psychological level, in my view, before we can begin to resolve the business challenges that result from that. Okay, let's look at the ugly, because this is, Stuart, to your question. So where I have anxiety at the moment is around the fact that we were just, as a global economy, coming out of the 2008 financial crisis, what some have called the Great Recession. In South Africa, we were not doing well from an economic point of view, and then we were hit by COVID-19 and the pandemic. So many businesses were overly indebted to start with, and that's why we repeatedly speak to how important it is to manage your balance sheet at a personal and a professional level, because as an SME business owner, you know, those two are often very interlinked, to make really strong decisions, courageous decisions, and to stick by those. Unfortunately, in some cases, it does mean letting people go. But it's critical for the greater good. Sometimes we do need to trim our businesses, and we shouldn't be afraid to do that. It's not a crime. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just that in times of crisis, sometimes we have to make hard calls. And that is our position, and that's how we would consult on this. At the end of the day, we've started to say, came up with this phrase, cash is not king, it's everything. You know, we've said cash is king for a long time. Cash now is everything. Cash flow, your ability to access money on a month-to-month basis, right, however you need to work it, is absolutely everything. For those businesses who have been prudent and put money aside, or have been fortunate enough to be able to save some money, there will certainly be opportunities to buy into, and margin to protect, perhaps margin to widen, and certainly market share to take. The most important point from this slide is, I would say, I would strongly encourage small businesses in particular, but it applies equally to our corporate clients. Don't overinvest in technology or online commerce, depending on what your business is. If you're building a fully end-to-end digital business, then I understand you only want to work in the digital space, in the online space. Really test that. Go through an iterative, agile process of building your solution. I wouldn't use the latest and greatest technology. That's my personal view and my professional advice. I don't think that we're going to see a world too different in 6 months from now, from what we're living in today. Certainly technology as an enabler will help us, and we've seen that as a steady introduction into society over the last 20 years. I don't think we're going to see necessarily a major step change. All right. So let me do this last slide. Actually, let me just speak here to let me answer Stuart's question, which is, what is your prediction for the next 6 months? So my prediction is not necessarily a pretty one. I think we're going to come out of this and realize the extent to which the global economy has really reached a very difficult place. Britain announced an economic contraction of 20% 4 days ago. Singapore's announced their contraction. The figure was close to 40%. Most of South Africa's economy has been closed down entirely for 6 months. It's going to be a difficult time. And the thing in many ways that worries me the most is that in the US is printing money and using quantitative easing on a level never seen before in history. So trillions, the number looks in the region of $5 trillion is being pumped into the US economy and the global markets. That money is finding its way into the stock market because there aren't yields elsewhere. And that's what's driving up the stock market to the extent it has. That's another whole conversation, so we won't get into that. I think the critical thing to determine what will get us out of this process is the extent to which people have money to start buying product. And our job then in the SME sector is to package our product in such a way that it makes it both attractive from a utility point of view and a price point of view, so that people buy product as and when they can. I don't think we're going to see a lot of money around for a period of 6 to 12 months. I made reference to the Roaring Twenties because that might occur, but that might occur on the very high end of the market. There are people who are making tremendous fortunes during this time. There was a massive dip in the US stock market in March, and that's more than recovered now. So that money, I wrote in a piece, I think 4 months ago, that the 1%, if we're not careful, the 1% will become the 0.001%. And I can't stress that enough. So we're in a very interesting, very difficult time in history from an economic point of view and a commercial point of view. Shirley asked a question, what change do you see in government? Do you see a new political party? because of the pressure on Cyril Ramaphosa, who's tired of being criticized, change to somebody like Dlamini Zuma or David Mabuza is sick at the moment. Yeah. So my view is that Ace Magashula's speech 2 weeks ago signaled the end of the ANC, which is quite a big statement to make, but I really believe that South Africans, and that was in relation to the corruption around the PPE equipment, the extent to which government ministers are involved in tenders for that PPE. And his statement was, show me one ANC leader who hasn't been involved in such business. So my personal view, and remember, I come from a very left background. I left South Africa in '85 because I wouldn't go to the army. I've supported the ANC for, 30 years of my life or more. I don't believe that the ANC has the moral compass and the backing of the broad swath of South Africans. What will happen now, in my view, is a set of new political constellations, and probably a situation like Israel or Italy, where we see clusters of political parties coming together. It leads to a fairly unstable political environment, coalition politics, but I do think that that's where we're going until somebody emerges as a dominant party. What that party is, I don't know. Dean asked a question around technology. Yeah, it seems many businesses have pivoted now to an online space to survive and grow their top line. Yeah, so I think it's true that many businesses are hopping online. I'm not sure that that's a sustainable position, particularly in certain sectors like retail. So my view on online is often the disappointment quotient is high, particularly for non-consumable goods. I don't see people shopping for once-off items online, clothing, shoes, accessories. We want, men and women, people in general, want to be able to touch and feel a product, try it on, and don't want to go through the schlep necessarily of taking product home, trying it on and returning it if they don't like it. So I'm short on online commerce, except for consumables. If I need black bags, I might well order those from a Pick and Pay online. If I need apples, I might order those online. So for me, the jury's out in terms of the value of online. Certainly, if you're dealing with a platform that provides an arbitrage that mediates a transaction from point A to point B, I think there's real possibility there. And that's why things like online gaming, content, anything to do with content, I think can do very well online. It really depends on which sector you're speaking to. And I must also say that certainly in the corporate space, where budgets for online commerce might have been 10%, at most they might have been doubled, but there's no sense that shoppers are not going to want and need to come into store and engage. What we will see from an online point of view, from an internet-driven engagement point of view, is more and more technology where that is service related. So returns will be technology driven. Call centers will be increasingly technology driven, not necessarily bots, but call center reps who might sit at home in a distributed fashion. And again, that speaks to savings of the health issues of lots of people sitting in a room together, and also savings of not having to rent large spaces. Yeah, so Dean, I hope that answers your question. Happy to come back to that. So let me just finish up quickly. I'm just aware of the time. We've got about 10 minutes or so, and then you might have other questions. So I believe that, at the end of the day, we've learned a lot in this period. We've learned that we can use screens. We don't have to jump on a plane to Johannesburg or anywhere else to do business for an hour-long meeting. We can use a screen. It doesn't build relationship to the extent that we experience when we meet people in person, but it's very efficient. So, for example, for us, on an initial tender, it's very easy to connect to somebody on a screen, get an initial sense of one another, whether we can help one another, and then follow up in person. We've learned we need one another more than ever. I think I'm hoping that we see more caring in our society, people reaching out to one another, caring about their relationships more. I think people have learned a lot about how the media is not necessarily good for us. That when we watch too much TV, it creates a lot of anxiety. It's important from an informational point of view, but it's not always good for us. I think we've learned that we can survive, adapt, and change, and that we are far more resilient as human beings than we might have imagined or understood before. And then the final couple points, we call the change paradox, the strange notion that in every opportunity there is risk, and in every crisis there is opportunity. And we usually focus on the opportunity in crisis, but we don't realize that it's important to manage the interrelationship of opportunity and risk in any transaction. There are very, very few transactions which are all upside. And this is a time when risk management, I would say, is extremely important. And we often say to clients that change management is much more about risk management than anything else. I also don't believe, and I think we should resist this notion of the new normal. As human beings, we are adaptable, but we spring back to old habits and old ways of being quite easily. And any of us who have tried to change habits, go to gym more often, quit cigarettes, etc., know how hard it is to move into a new reality. And I found it very interesting, the queues around the block for alcohol and cigarettes just over the last couple of days. So I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we should fight for a society that's more just, that's more safe, that's more conscious. That's my personal view. It's what CCG stands for. And ultimately, what we hope to do is find our way back to a place called hope, where we can feel hopeful about the future, that we don't have to feel as scared, that we can feel that there's a level of abundance around us. And I think that we're realizing that if we work together as a society, we can get there. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much. I plan to only speak for 20 minutes, and happy to take any questions that people might have or comments.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephen. I've got a few more questions here. Should come through directly to me. It says, if I have limited cash flow and savings, how do I survive the next few months?
Okay, so it's a great question, and it's a very, very difficult one to answer, and I'd need more information. It really depends on, is that cash flow needed to support one's personal life, one's business? If it's in the context of business, I would really look very carefully at all spending and how you can cut spending aggressively. At the end of the day, entrepreneurs are interesting people. They're willing to take risk. And I think sometimes you just have to take risk. I've heard of so many businesses being started on credit cards. Now, this is contradicting myself from what I said earlier about managing debt, etc. If you have to do that, then do that. Apply for any possible assistance from government. There's been a lot of criticism of the banking sector for not making that 200 billion rands available to business in the way that was intended. The last figure I heard was that of that 200 billion, only 22 billion has been dispersed. And that's because the banks have been far too cautious in the application of funding. I think it's really, really important to look at our lifestyles, look at where we can cut money. we might need to let staff go. Staff might need to come into work on lower salaries. We might have to cut things like insurances, like what we spend on food, on clothing. This is one of the reasons why I'm saying be careful about spending money on the so-called nirvana of technology and other items. I think we need to be really prudent and cautious during this time. I would say that type of question is best dealt with a financial advisor or a banker or your accountant or somebody who knows your affairs, knows your business, or if that's a personal, private individual who knows your circumstances, so that they can help you build perhaps a new budget, an austerity budget, even if it's just for the next few months.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephen. And just one more here, just because we're running out of time, but I'll combine two of the questions. So how do I maintain connection with my employees during social distancing? And what should I do if employees feel scared to come back to work? So both of those kind of.
Lovely questions. Okay, so this is one thing that I've never seen in my career, is a request from a client or concern from a client that employees are scared to come to work because of COVID. And that's not because they have any comorbidities, they are not in a risky age category. This is the impact of lockdown. And this is why I very strongly believe that we need to get back to normal practice as quickly as possible. Even if we have to force ourselves out of our homes, the longer we stay locked down, the longer we become prisoners of our own minds, because it is very much in your own mind. So let me be clear, if you are over 62, if you have a comorbidity, especially things like diabetes and hypertension, or if you have family members who have those conditions, then it's important to protect yourself and the family. But otherwise, we should be getting out into society. We should be wearing a mask. We should be, so I personally wear gloves when I go out, so that's a personal choice. But we need to wear masks, we need to wash our hands, we need to keep socially distanced. We need to stay in well-ventilated areas, but we do need to get out, step by step. We do need to think about the protocols that we have at the office, which it becomes difficult at times, because we had a circumstance recently where there was very good protocol in this entire facility, except for one door, because there was one entrance and one exit, but that door everybody could touch with their hand. They didn't have a single security guard opening and closing that door. So we realized that that's a very risky touch point, which can spread disease. It's like the silly thing, you go to a restaurant and you have to sign in, everyone uses the same pen. It's absolutely ludicrous, even if they're spraying it. So these are the little things that we need to watch for now. Our position is we need to be extra vigilant. We need to engage with our employees. We've been forced, I want to say, to develop what's called a resilience program for employees, which we launched about 2 weeks ago, because of the number of calls we were getting about employees won't come to work. Employees don't feel safe. So we really need to engage with our employees and help them over the psychological threshold. And that's why I talk so much about the psychological impact of lockdown, of what we've gone through. We have to start there if we want to solve the business challenges facing us.
Right. Thank you, Stephen. I think we've run out of time, but just really wanted to thank you enormously, mostly for your valuable time and just for your insightfulness, your level-headed approach to this time that we're in, and for sharing your views with us. So much appreciated from all of us. Thank you. And just for everyone who's listening, thank you for attending. And just to let you know that later this week we'll be running another intake onto our mentorship programs. So if anybody knows somebody who could benefit from having a mentor, please tell them to be in touch, preferably before Friday. Yeah, thanks to everybody and have a good week.
Thank you.